Us with her thoughts is that Shari Olefson, author of Financial Fresh Start and CEO of the Carnegie Group. Shari, good to see you. What are these numbers going to tell us after the previous month's fall? Are we going to have a bounce back?
A little bit, but not significant. And I think we can all agree that we've got somewhat of a downward trend in U.S. home sales, predominantly up until now due to affordability, because wages are just simply not keeping up with the rising home prices. But moving forward, the most significant impact on U.S. home sales going into 2014 is going to be U.S. housing finance, because of course, in order to buy a home, you need a loan. And most Americans are still getting those through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. We know that Congress and the president have been throwing around ideas for reforming the two GSEs for a long time. But now this month, we've seen some really interesting interest from investors increasing their stakes in the GSEs, and in fact, one fund actually offering to take over the insurance component of the GSEs. So that struggle between government wanting to reform and investors wanting to save their current investment and perhaps take advantage of the opportunity, these values are up over 1,000% this year, will have a huge impact on what happens to U.S. home sales moving forward.
So what is going to happen to Fannie and Freddie? At the end of the day, I mean, there's quasi-government agencies, we know, but they've always done exactly what the government has suggested they do. And that's the point, isn't it?
Exactly. You know, to blame Fannie and Freddie for the crisis is a little bit of an oversimplification, because if they of course were following directives from the president and Congress, and of course they don't originate loans, so it was the lenders who actually originated a lot of these fraudulent loans, and it was actual homeowners who defaulted on the loans. So that's a little bit of an oversimplification. There have been several ideas floating around in Washington for a long time, but now what's taking front and center stage with the GSEs are these dozen or so investor lawsuits. So it may actually be the courts that decide in large part what happens with Fannie and Freddie.
Shari, you mentioned that we've seen a downward trend in home sales over the last few months, and that certainly makes sense, especially given the fact that we did see a taper scare and we saw a rising of rates, and that will likely continue after the new year. What kind of effect do you think that has on the economy, given that we're looking at what is otherwise a pretty weak recovery?
Well, obviously it's significant. And the rise in prices, which is also expected to slow down. Of course, a lot of that rise in price this past year, almost 12%, has been due to low inventory and just a less number of distressed homes selling. So most of the homes selling now are non-distressed, and of course is bringing prices up, has added a lot to U.S. consumer confidence. Those price rises are expected to significantly taper as well, which we know has a huge impact on the overall wealth effect and consumer confidence.
Yeah, do you think, Shari, that and I'll ask Gina this as well, do you think the last bit of tapering, I mean, the Fed should still be buying mortgage securities, even if they've stopped buying government securities?
Yeah, well, we need to have the least possible ripples in the housing market that we can moving forward into 2014. Bringing the private industry into housing is going to be significant. That's obviously what Washington has wanted to happen. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac traditionally, even at the peak of the bubble, Ross, were only involved in around 35% of mortgage originations. Now that number is 3 times that amount. So that's going to be essential. And that's something that's been real interesting about this private sector interest these last few weeks, because a lot of folks thought that was going to be the biggest problem bringing investors in, and yet here they are now. But of course it makes sense. If you look at the profits, the third quarter profits for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were huge. They only owe another $4 billion. Believe it or not, we're saying only $4 billion, but it was a $189 billion bailout. So that amount is going to be repaid by spring, and folks are expecting to see significant reform. These investors don't want to lose their investments, and they want to take advantage of the opportunity.
It's a fair point, Shari. Thanks for that. Shari Olefson, CEO of the Carnegie Group, and briefly